The story today, as many Cardinals fans, I assume, know by now, John Lackey from the Red Sox is coming to St. Louis in exchange for outfielders Alan Craig and right-hand pitcher Joe Kelly. Let's bring Cole Claybourn from cardsconclave.com, High Sox Sunday. Cole, good afternoon. I know this was short notice. We just called you about an hour and a half before we went on the air, so we do appreciate the time. Let's talk about, before we get into Lackey and what he can bring to the team, the Cardinals were a team that were mentioned in the John Lester situation. Were they ever a serious contender as far as you know to land Lester?
I don't think so. I didn't hear that it was as serious as it may have been led on to be. I think they were more contenders for David Price, and I kind of felt all along that they would not go after an ace, that they would go after guys like the ones that they got in Justin Masterson and John Lackey. I mean, John Mozeliak has done well with getting those types of pitchers in the past. If you remember, they've got Jake Westbrook and other guys like that in the past where they haven't had to give up a whole lot, and they get a pretty good return out of those guys. I mean, the John Lackey deal, it's a very club-friendly contract. I mean, he's going to exercise his option, which means he'll be able to pitch basically for really cheap next year, too. So they've got a really cheap veteran pitcher for next year, which is a good thing. And then Justin Masterson is just 29 years old and has a really good sinker, which I mean, at this point they really needed pitching, and they got that. I mean, I think their pitching is definitely better than it was yesterday.
Well, with them not getting Lester or Price, was Lackey and Masterson, were they on their radar the whole time? I guess what I'm trying to get at is would either one of these guys or both still been a Cardinal if they would have gotten a Price or a Lester?
I mean, probably not. If they could have gotten one or both Price or Lester, I think they would have been fine with that. But my guess is that the asking price was too high for both Price and Lester. And I mean, if you look at that big, huge blockbuster deal that Price was just involved in, I don't even remember who all was in it. It was a 3-team deal, and my guess is that they were asking for far too much. The Cardinals didn't really deplete any of their AAA depth. They traded a AA outfielder in James Ramsey, who was their first-round draft pick in 2012, to get Justin Masterson, and that was probably the biggest piece they gave up. I mean, you could argue, I mean, I'm talking in terms of prospects, you know, they weren't really forced to give up too many, and John Mozeliak really likes to keep his prospects. So I guess if you look at it from that standpoint, they did pretty well, and they gave up two major leaguers who are the tough part about it is that they were both fan favorites. Joe Kelly was, you know, really enamored himself with the fans, and people really grew to like him because of his personality. And Alan Craig had been so good for the last 2.5 years that just for whatever reason this year has not been able to find a stroke, and so they got rid of him, and his contract was pretty favorable for the Red Sox. I mean, he's controllable for the next 4 or 5 years. And Joe Kelly, I mean, they're kind of trying to rebuild in Boston now, and they've got a young pitcher who can throw upper 90s.
Talking to Cole Claybourn from the High Sox Sunday blog at cardsconclave.com. You can follow him on Twitter at @HighSock_Sunday. Ford and O'Brien, ESPN Evansville 105.3 online, ESPNEvansville.com. I want to go back to something you made mention of for people that don't know, in the way that the Cardinals are getting a pretty cheap deal next season with Lackey. Explain to us this unusual clause in his contract in regards to that Tommy John surgery.
I'm not familiar with all the language with it. I just know that basically what it amounts to is that he'll end up playing for very cheap for the Cardinals next year. And that's obviously a good thing. I mean, he's a veteran, which is something that they could use at this point. And he's got a guy that brings in tremendous playoff experience, and obviously won a World Series with the Red Sox last year. His personality is kind of it's a lot like AJ Brzezinski. He's kind of a fiery guy. He brings a lot of emotion when he pitches, and it's kind of something different that you haven't seen a lot of. I mean, I guess probably the closest thing we've seen to John Lackey is maybe sort of a Lance Lynn type of bulldog mentality. So it'll be interesting to see, especially with the way that Pierzynski left Boston and have him kind of teamed up with an old Boston team. It will be interesting. But as far as his clause goes, I'm not familiar with all of the language in it. I just know that basically what it amounts to is that he'll end up being a very cheap bargain for the Cardinals, and they'll have a very good pitcher for the next year or so for relatively cheap.
Now, can Lackey come in and make an immediate impact for the team, or is this something that we may not see the rewards for until a little later on in the season, maybe even the playoffs?
I mean, I think he will. I mean, he like I said, he's a veteran, and you know, maybe a change of scenery could be good for him. I mean, he comes into a team that's in a playoff race. I think anytime that you're able to go from a team that was obviously looking to rebuild to a team that's looking to gain ground and win a division, that probably rejuvenates you a little bit as a player. And I'm hoping the same will be the same. The case will be the same for Justin Masterson coming from Cleveland to St. Louis. So I think that they definitely. I mean, I don't think they would have traded for him if they didn't expect an immediate impact. I mean, the biggest thing they need right now from starters is guys that can go and give innings. They haven't really had that. Look at last night. Even Joe Kelly got shelled, and they lost 12-1. Guys like Carlos Martinez and even Shelby Miller haven't been making very deep starts, and that's just they're depleting their bullpen and tiring at their bullpen too much to where anybody that they traded for, I think they're going to expect them to come in and give valuable innings, and that's probably one of the most valuable assets of Justin Masterson, as he is known as an innings eater, and certainly John Lackey has been known as that in the past too. So I guess to answer the question, yes, I would be surprised if they weren't expecting them both to make immediate impacts.
All right, one last thing. Talking to Cole Claybourn from High Sox Sunday, you can read his blog at cardsconclave.com. You mentioned what the Cardinals gave up in exchange for Lackey, Alan Craig, and right-handed pitcher Joe Kelly. Is the pro of getting Lackey worth the con of losing Craig and Kelly?
I guess that's sort of a question. I guess that's the golden question right now. I mean, that's something that we'll probably find out over the next 2 years or so, and it's hard to really know what you'll get from Alan Craig. It's hard to really know what the seriousness of his injury is and if he'll ever recover from it fully. And Joe Kelly obviously was hurt for a while this year. I mean, he had a hamstring injury that kept him out for almost 3 months. So, I mean, I personally thought that I thought maybe they gave up on Alan Craig a little too soon. It's a very interesting thing. I mean, they gave him a long-term contract last year, and then this year it's been all about wanting to get Oscar Taveras playing time. So it kind of begs the question, if Mozeliak knew that Taveras was waiting in the wings, what was sort of the point of the long-term Alan Craig contract, unless he maybe thought Matt Adams wouldn't work out at first base, so they thought maybe they could put Taveras in right and Craig at first base. So I don't really know what the plan was there, but I kind of felt like, you make a promise to Alan Craig with that contract, and then he goes and has 4 bad months, and then all of a sudden he's tradable. But I guess I also kind of thought maybe they could have built a better return for him, because I think that he is a good player, and I don't think that he's nearly as bad as we've seen him this year. I mean, if you remember last year, he was an MVP candidate, so I thought maybe if they were going to trade him, they could have maybe packaged him for David Price or John Lester. But I mean, they needed to get pitching, and they got that. So, as a Cardinal fan, it's hard to really complain, because they've really upgraded in an area that they needed help in. And now, I mean, Mozeliak is putting all of his chips into the Oscar Taveras hat, and promptly Oscar Taveras answered with a home run in his first at bat today. So, if that's a sign of things to come, then maybe John Mozeliak is a lot smarter than all of us. Which I guess I could go ahead and say he is smarter than all of us at his job, because he does a damn good job. But aside from this trade, I really hope that it works out, and I really hope that these pitching pieces that they've added really help out for the playoff run.
It's Cole Claybourn from High Sox Sunday, the blog you can check out at cardsconclave.com. Give him a follow on Twitter at highsock_Sunday. Cole, I know, like I said, late notice for you today. We appreciate you taking a few minutes. I know you got to run, and we'll keep in touch as the season progresses, all right?
All right, thank you, guys.